Was there something that propelled the Netziv and the other writers focus on Medrash and commentaries on Medrash during that period? Was it a reaction to something? Were they trying to get a certain point across? Why? Why was that a commonality in that part of Jewish history?
Yes, so I have a few theories on this. One is sort of a lofty, theoretical idea, and the other is perhaps a much more practical, less highfalutin thought on this. So the lofty one goes like this. I think you could actually trace an arc of commentary that follows almost the hierarchy of authority in halachic texts. That is, our earliest commentaries tend to focus, right, on the text of the Bavli itself, right? That is our most authoritative halachic text, right? And out of that emerges both the perushim that we have on it, as well as the halachic, codes, which, starting with the Rif, and the Rambam and the Torah, all try to codify for us what is found there in the Bavli. I don't want to oversimplify it and say that that's was saturated, but I think by the time you get to the 18th century, there's kind of this desire to say, all right, well, what's next, right? What's next after we have so much commentary today already on the Bavli? I think it's interesting to note that the 18th century is where we begin to have commentary on the next rung, which would be the Yerushalmi, right? In terms of halachic hierarchy. And so our great works on the Yerushalmi emerged from the 18th century. I think by the time we get to the 19th century, we're almost ready for that next rung down, which is the rest of the material of Chazal, which is found in places like our Midrashim and Tosefta, and our earliest Gaonic works, like the She'iltos. Now, for sure, some of this was the Vilna Gaon, right? It's the influence of the Vilna Gaon, because the Vilna Gaon clearly wrote on all of these things. He amended all of these texts. He was interested in sort of the broad canon of Chazal, completely. But I think there's a progression there that can be traced, that lands us in the beginning of the 19th century, post Yerushalmi. Now let's look at the rest of Chazal. There is also a very definite reality that these texts are more accessible in the early 19th century. You have a real boom in the printing industry, in the Hebrew printing industry in Eastern Europe, in the decades from 1780 to 1820. I believe you have 43 new printing houses that emerged in Eastern Europe between the years 1780 and 1821, compared to 6 that emerged in the 80 years prior to that. So when you have new printing houses, they need new material, right, to put out there, and so these works become accessible. But the other piece that I think it very much ties into the specific focus on Medrash has to do with the position of Magid. This is something I touch upon a little bit in my book as well. Many of the Perushim that are written by people who hold this position of Magid, or Magid Mesharim, which I think is also a position that's not so well understood today. It's often associated, I think, with storytelling, itinerant preaching, which was true in some areas of Eastern Europe. But what's often lost is that the Magid was actually the predominant public intellectual of the time, before the rise of the yeshivas, before you have, a Rosh Yeshiva. The dominant public intellectual in Eastern European life was the Magid. He was the person who spoke on a regular basis, right? Your Rav of the town spoke twice a year, and Shabbos Hagadol and Shabbos Shuvah. The person who would give shiurim, who would educate the masses, whether it was halacha, or more often than not, it was machshava, it was musar, would be the maggid. If you were a big town, you'd have a permanent maggid. This was his job. And not only that, but the maggid generally, the position of maggid generally came along with a position on the town's beis din. So this was a first-rate Talmud Chacham. So Vilna has a maggid. Famously, the Malbim tried out to be the maggid of Vilna, and he didn't make it. But so that these magidim are speaking on a regular basis, usually Shabbos afternoon. If you're a smaller town and you can't afford to have your own maggid, there were itinerant magidim who would come in. They'd come, go town to town. And Shabbos, you'd stop on the on the shulchan in Shabbos morning. You'd say such and such a maggid that's here is going to give a shiur this afternoon. But so at the end of the day, these magidim need chomer ledrush. They need what to speak about, right? And often their material is intended to be inspiring, and it's intended to to really provoke the imagination and engage their audiences. And so Medrash becomes a place to look in order to do that. And I think that very much ties in to the rise and popularity of Medrash during this time.